This is Greg James, and you're listening to University Radio Nottingham, otherwise known as URN, or EARN if you get it wrong. Go well!
Hello, a very warm welcome to The Big Picture. We are live on University Radio Nottingham. I am Felix Hawes. Joining us today we have Ben.
Hello, Felix.
Hello, Ben. Scarlett.
Hello.
Hello, Scarlett. And Daniel.
It's good to be back, Felix.
Yeah, it's been a long time, Daniel, but always good to have you on. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We're talking about Nicola Sturgeon. She's gone. She's had enough. She's left as First Minister of Scotland. We're also talking about Biden's popping of balloons. And we're also going to be talking about Jeremy Corbyn, who has not been allowed to stand as a Labour candidate. You can message in to the underneath on the website if you want to say something, and I might read it out. In fact, we've had a new message. Good to hear Daniel again. Well, thank you to our wonderful listener.
Who said that?
I have no idea, Daniel, who could possibly have said that. Well, it's good to have you back. Yes. Okay, let's start with Nicola Sturgeon. She's resigned 8 years as leader of the SNP and as First Minister. We should have a new leader by the end of next month, and no candidates actually declared yet in terms of who's running. Nicola Sturgeon's reason that she gave the press for going is that she's sort of had enough. She thought that the independence movement was becoming too much about her, and she thought that was negative to the Yes campaign, that is for Scotland to leave the UK. So first of all, I'll ask the panel, why do you think Nicola Sturgeon has resigned? Is it because of she's just run out of juice, she's had enough, she wants to move on, she's done 8 years, it's a pretty long time, particularly in modern politics, to be a leader of a political party, or do you think there's more beneath that? Let's start with you, Ben.
I mean, I certainly think political factors have played a role. I think you can't look at the controversy of the Gender Recognition Act, the general sense that Scottish independence is losing steam, and say that there's no reason for her to go there. But to be honest, the thing that stands out to me here is that this is just a few weeks after Jacinda Ardern stood down, and to me what it symbolises more of is the outrageous way that many of the tabloid papers treat women leaders across the world. It's gross, and frankly I don't think you can blame anyone for not wanting to put up with that much abuse. So I think it's a mix, but you certainly can't underestimate the extent to which the personal treatment of people like Nicola Sturgeon, Jacinda Ardern, Sanna Marin contributes to them not wanting to be in public life.
Do you think that, sorry, before I go to the other panellists, do you think that Nicola Sturgeon receives more negative treatment from the press than Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson?
Absolutely. There's no doubt.
Okay.
Boris Johnson broke the law, and papers like the Telegraph and the Mail were backing him 100%. The treatment of Nicola Sturgeon in the papers and the Telegraph, it is gross. She is seriously treated as incompetent, as not being up to the job, which the vast bulk of her male colleagues would not be.
Fair enough. Scarlett, what do you think?
Just on Ben's point, I would agree, given the idea that if you look at the Daily Mail, they run titles like Nasty Nicola. I don't think they say that she is personally incompetent, but they talk about her government quite a lot. But there is something in that with their standards on health and education in Scotland haven't been subpar, and I believe that's also some of the reason why she chose to resign. I believe the biggest issue is independence. I believe that's the reason why she resigned, because she cannot keep on saying that it looks inevitable, because it doesn't. They argued that the next general election, the SNP would run on the single issue of, if you vote for the SNP, you are voting for independence. This is a de facto referendum. But within her party, that did not seem to be what they wanted. That was not received well within the general media or by the people of Scotland. So I believe that she's realised that she cannot achieve her objective despite being First Minister for 8 years. She was Deputy for several years before that, and I think she has recognised the need for change. I believe also, we talked there about some personal issues. I believe that's also true. In her speech, she referenced the fact that her niece and nephew are now 17 years old, and when she first went into Scottish Parliament, they were babies. And I think we've all forgotten how long Nicola Sturgeon has been in politics, since 2007, which is insane, as you said, by the standards of modern politics. So I believe it's a combination. She cannot achieve her objectives, the reason why she is a politician, the reason why she's First Minister to bring independence, and also her longevity in politics in general in this day and age wears on your soul, as she very much emphasised in her speech.
Very interesting points. Daniel, what do you think behind Nicola Sturgeon's resignation?
Look, I'm going to have to disagree with...
what a surprise!
The two other panellists on today, and I imagine that may be a running theme throughout this evening, but that's good for the listeners, so I hope they will enjoy it. Look, what do you expect? I mean, the Telegraph and Mail were both Conservative papers. What do you think? They're going to say that Nicola Sturgeon's legacy has been a success when, I'm sure we will go on to this later, has evidently been a total failure, even in her own terms of the things that she described that she hoped would be a success when she became a First Minister.
Yes, but I'd just like to argue about the idea of the language used, nasty Nicola. In what world is that productive language?
The way that the TV in particular, you can talk about newspapers being partisan, and newspapers are more partisan. And of course, Sturgeon has newspapers like The National, which is unbelievably pro-SNP. We're talking about sexism, Daniel.
Of
course, you have the Mail, which are very pro-conservative. But if you look at TV, they have been saying Nicola Sturgeon was a breath of fresh air, said Sky News or something similar. They never said the same thing about Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson had a minister, Chris Pincher, who pinched someone in the Carlton Club, and that saw the fall of his government. And I do believe that was morally wrong, and I've said before on this show that I think it was right he went. But Nicola Sturgeon has had the scandal of letting male rapists into women's prisons. I mean, it's simply incomparable and an absolute joke, and that is clearly the reason why she went. This trans Scottish Gender Recognition Act was never going to pass.
There have been a lot of...
Paint it over. I mean, you haven't even mentioned it. It's
Yes, I
clearly
did.
a major factor. Well, it's the most major factor in why she went.
Do you think, Daniel, that wasn't a very popular bill? And yeah, I think the panel, whatever their views on that bill, know that. But do you think that in itself was the reason, when there have been lots of unpopular things the SNP have done in the past? I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's approval ratings have gone down, but they're still far above any other politician in the UK. I mean, I think Rishi Sunak would dream of having, I think her net rating is -4. I think he would dream of that. That's a figure that no one really gets. I don't think anyone's really had that since perhaps Boris Johnson at the sort of height of the beginning of COVID when he was more popular.
The SNP can get away with having a poor National Health Service. They can get away with spending more than Westminster on average and having worse services on average, because they can still just blame it on the Tories and still have this kind of line as we're really going for national independence and that's why you're voting for us. But on the Scottish Gender Recognition Act, they didn't have that, because it was clearly the opposite of what the Union wanted and what the UK wanted. They didn't have that excuse, whereas with everything else, all the other poor services that the SNP have delivered, they've had that excuse. And they've been able to hide behind that. She didn't have that this time, and that's ultimately why she resigned, because she saw it would fail.
What do we think about the loan fraud that's being investigated at the moment by the police? Do you think that had anything to do with it? There's missing £400,000 missing that was loaned, kept by the SNP as a sort of independence reserve fund. That's gone. That no one knows quite where that is. There's an investigation by the police into that. There was a loan given to the SNP by Peter Murrell, who is the chief executive of the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon's husband. Do you think that had anything to do with it, the outcome of that police investigation?
Well, if she knows that they did it and that they're guilty, then of course it probably did, and criminals should be prosecuted. There's no doubt there. Although there's plenty of corruption that went on around the Boris Johnson years that has not been investigated and probably will not. So yes, I'm sure if that's true, I'm sure it did play a role.
All right, okay, so before we look into the future and what this sort of, the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon will have on the independence cause and the future of Scotland and who is in charge of Scotland, let's have a look at the past, look at Nicola Sturgeon's legacy. As I mentioned, Nicola Sturgeon's popularity is sort of unprecedented for someone that's been in office for so long. Why do you think that is, and do you think her legacy is strong? Independence, which is obviously her main aim and her party's main aim, is now at sort of a record low of post-independence times. It's a 12-point lead for no now in recent polls. As touched upon by Daniel, NHS waiting times are very low. The attainment gap between rich and poor has increased. Literacy rates and numeracy rates are now worse than England for the first time. Life expectancy's gone down. Do you think? But on the other hand, she's very popular. Her COVID strategy was seen to be better than England, rightly or wrongly, and the Westminster government. And personally, just her sort of honesty seems to be liked by voters as well. Do you think? What do you think her legacy is for Scotland? Do you think she was a good First Minister? Scarlett, what do you think?
I'm going to say that I believe her longevity is something to be admired. I personally don't agree with Scottish independence, so a lot of what she stood for I fundamentally disagreed with. She was an effective politician. She is one of the most effective politicians we have in the UK. Therefore, that in terms of her legacy as First Minister, she provided a lot of stability. If we look at, conversely, the amount of... She's made it through 5 Conservative Prime Ministers, and I believe, she'll know her third or fourth Labour leader. So she's definitely stood the test of time. However, as we've seen, concerning things like the gender recognition bill, she was not able to answer questions about some legitimate criticisms about the bill. She was not able, because she used to hold weekly press conferences, because there was sort of this impression that she could be... I think there was some sort of hubris on the part that she knew how good a politician she was, and perhaps thought that she could have the ability to hold these weekly press conferences. But as we see concerning that bill, she was not able to answer any questions, and it was quite painful to watch, really. And as one of the topics we're going to get on is Jeremy Corbyn, and he also cannot answer questions on issues concerning anti-Semitism, and it's just quite painful to watch these interviews, and you think, yes, perhaps they should take a step back from frontline politics if they plainly cannot respond to questions of in an interview.
Daniel, what do you think? Thank you, Scarlett. What do you think, Daniel? Legacy of Nicola Sturgeon.
Look, I think the fact that she has been First Minister for so long, I think it's 7 years, is less impressive when you consider that the SNP just hasn't had any sort of effective opposition in Scotland. I think if you're going to look at her legacy, well, she hasn't really improved the odds of independence happening. I think she was lucky that Scotland voted Remain, and so therefore banked on that for a little while, and so it seemed possible. But you look at the main things happening in Scotland here. She said when she became First Minister that her main aim was decreasing the education gap between the rich and poor in Scotland, and that's distinctly not happened. NHS waiting times have gotten a lot worse. It was 62% receiving A&E treatment within 4 hours last month. The deficit is about twice as high as the UK. Alcoholism's increased. Drug-related deaths have increased. Yes, I do have the stats in front of me. The average earnings when she took over were 97% of the average UK, and now it's 93%. So and a big reason for that is the fact that taxes are higher in Scotland, and so I just, and therefore Scotland's been less entrepreneurial, and I've already spoken about, the extraordinary fallout that she's had over the Scottish Gender Recognition Act, which she said to Laura Kuenssberg in December was a hill she was willing to die on. Well, that is certainly the hill she died on, and so I don't really think she's had a very impressive legacy. And of course free speech concerns as well is something that I've just thought of as well. So no, not a good legacy.
Going back to what you said about the ambulance waiting times, I do believe it was 95% when she took office, and now has decreased to the figure that you mentioned, 62, was that you said?
Yes.
So that's a significant decrease. Of course, though, it's worth bearing in mind that similar decreases have occurred in England, but that's not to say that the NHS is a devolved body, so Sturgeon is somewhat responsible for that. Ben, legacy of Nicola Sturgeon.
Politically, there's no slamming it. She's been tremendously successful politically.
Never lost an election.
Yes, and has successfully continued Alex Salmond's strategy of displacing Labour as the left opposition, or maybe even the left party of government in Scotland. So politically, she's very successful. I agree. Don't think she's been good at all for Scotland in terms of how she's governed. I don't agree with Daniel's comments on the Gender Recognition Act or on free speech, but in most of the other things he said, he's right. She has not done a good job, because when nationalism is the organising principle of any government, this vague promise of we're better off on our own with no real details, then much like with Brexit, it's a total disaster. So no, I have no personal agreement with Nicola Sturgeon in terms of what she's done for the country, but politically there's no doubting her success.
Very interesting point. Okay, let's look to the future. A poll has come out recently, and this is before we even talk about who's going to succeed her. Polls come out recently. It came out conducted when Nicola Sturgeon was still in office, and it showed that the SNP were on about 38% and Labour only 3 points behind on 35%. Compare that to the 2019 general election, where I think Labour got 19% of the vote. In Scotland, that's a huge increase, and in fact, because of the way first past the post works, Labour would actually get more seats with that than the SNP in Scotland. So do you think there is an opportunity here for Labour to retake the position of being the main party in Scotland? Bearing in mind, in 2010, not that long ago, and when Labour lost the election, they still got 41 seats of the 59 in Scotland. They now have one. Do you think there's going to be a resurgence for Labour in Scotland? Is that too early for us to say? And what effect will that have on the Conservatives? Just to bear in mind that the Labour Party has got, in terms of percentage of SNP voters and Conservative voters from 2019, about an equal amount have fled to Labour in Scotland. 18% of 2019 Tory voters and 17% of SNP 2019 voters have gone to Labour. Obviously, that in raw numbers, that's a lot more SNP, because there's a lot more SNP voters than Tories. Daniel, let's go to you first. What do you think this will make in terms of the electoral future of the SNP? But as we've mentioned with Ben earlier, that Nicola Sturgeon's never lost an election. How much of the SNP's success is down to Sturgeon? Daniel?
I think very limited. If you look at when Alex Salmond stopped being the SNP leader, there was a lot of talk that this guy is the SNP. He goes, the SNP falls, and that was found to be false when Nicola Sturgeon took over. And there's similar gestures being said today, and I just don't think it's necessarily the case. It will make a big difference who the next leader is. But the idea that Sturgeon is the face of the SNP is false. She has been for the past 7 years, but just because she's gone doesn't mean they will necessarily, flail and founder, and that's the end of the SNP. They probably will do less well at the next general election. I imagine Labour will gain, and I probably prefer Labour to the SNP in Scotland.
Many senior Tories have told the press as well that they're quite happy to see Labour become the party of Scotland again if it keeps the SNP out.
Yeah, so am I. I think Labour's generally a better party than the SNP. It hurts me to say that as a Conservative. I just think the Conservatives may gain, but it all depends. If someone like Katie Forbes take over, then social Conservatives will feel like they can vote SNP again, and that would be quite a big deal. For instance,
we will get on to that in terms of the potential leaders in a bit, but that's a good point to make there, Daniel. But we'll address that further soon. In terms of the electoral benefits of the SNP without Sturgeon and Labour's rise in Scotland, Ben, what do you make to that?
Well, I know you said you were discussing this later, but it does depend on who the leader is.
Yeah.
Because the point of Katie Forbes is the SNP is not a left-wing party as its organising principle. It's a nationalist party. That means you have people who are nationalist from a right-wing direction and a left-wing direction. Since Alex Salmond took over, they very shrewdly calculated that if they become a party of the left, they are much more popular in Scotland than like in the 80s when they were known as the Scottish Conservatives. But if someone who is more of the right takes over, then that potentially alienates a whole base of support for the SNP, who are basically voting for them as protest votes against the Tories, as like a left-wing protest vote. So depending on who the leader is, depending if they're as savvy as Nicola Sturgeon and if they're from the same wing of the party as Nicola Sturgeon, will decide whether Labour gains or loses, is my view.
That's a good point as well. Scarlett, what do you think?
I'm wondering about the role of the Scottish Conservatives, because they used to be the second biggest party in Scotland under Ruth Davidson and under Douglas Ross. I mean, they're an absolute mess at the moment. And I think they may also have a hand to play, but they seem to be running around like headless chickens at the moment, because there's that divide between the English Tories and the Scottish Tories. In terms of Labour, Labour have like the National Party have not perhaps indicated what their position is on a lot of policies. And everyone sort of assumes that if we talk about leaders, that Anne was... sorry, this name's just escaped my head. Could anyone help me?
The Scottish Labour leader,
Yeah.
Anna
Anna
Sawar.
Sawar.
Yeah. There was lots of speculation in the media about being, is this somebody that can be a potential First Minister? But I haven't seen anything that he's sort of said or done that could be indicative that he could fulfill that position. So I think it's quite interesting to see sort of how he matches up against the potential successor that we will now go on to talk about.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is going to be our next question. Who is going to succeed Nicola Sturgeon? Now, one of our listeners has commented and said that with Daniel's point earlier, when Salmon did resign, and Daniel, you're right, there was a lot of commentary about will that mean the fall of the SNP? But what this listener has said is that Sturgeon was the obvious successor. In fact, there wasn't a leadership election. She became the leader. There is no real successor for Sturgeon at the moment, no clear one. There was a poll done, and Kate Forbes, who you mentioned, Daniel, won that with 7% of the vote. But the real winner was, don't know, 69% of the vote. So there really is a vacuum here for leadership of the SNP. So from what I've looked, it looks like there's really three main contenders. John Sweeney, the Deputy First Minister, former leader of the SNP before Alex Salmond, has ruled himself out. So there seems to be three candidates, none of which have actually declared yet, that probably have a chance of winning. That is Kate Forbes, who's on maternity leave, the Economic Secretary, which is basically Scotland's equivalent of the Chancellor. Angus Robertson, who was formerly the leader of the SNP at Westminster. He lost his seat in 2017, ironically to Douglas Ross, but he's now back in Holyrood as the Constitutional Secretary. And then there's Hamza Youssef, who is the Health Secretary in Scotland, or is he Health? I think he's Health Secretary. So there are three candidates. Now, Angus Robertson and Hamza Youssef are not too dissimilar to Nicola Sturgeon in terms of policy beliefs. Hamza Youssef is more younger, so the new generation. Angus Robertson's been around for a while. But Kate Forbes is the one that's caused a lot of discussion in the media. She is a member of the Free Church of Scotland, which is a evangelical Christian church, and with that she has some social conservative beliefs. She's pro-life, and she's also anti-same-sex marriage. It is also rumoured that one of the reasons why the gender recognition bill came through when it did was because Kate Forbes was on maternity leave, and she is believed to be against it. So what do we think about these three candidates? Kate Forbes is marginally the most favourable in terms of polls, but that might be different with SNP members. Who do you think is going to win, and what do you think the consequences are of any of these leaders? Scarlett, let's go to you first.
So Kate Forbes is the only one out of the ones you just mentioned that I actually had never heard of until the speculation about the potential new successor. I think it's quite interesting the point you make about the social conservative beliefs, because Scotland is more to the left than the rest of the UK on social issues. So I wonder maybe if they're thinking about their electoral success, whether they pick her for that reason. But then again, with AMS in Scotland, that may not be such a factor, because they may maybe value some of her other policies. And if we're talking about the main issues in Scotland, as we've just mentioned, that being with NHS waiting times and education, that does not relate to social issues. So they may say, perhaps those issues would not impact her electoral success or her ability at a general election. You mentioned John Swinney.
John Sweeney's not going to run,
Okay.
so it's or stand. It's going to be Angus Robertson.
Yes,
I don't want to say it's going to be. I don't know if he's going to run, but the main candidates that are left
Yes, well,
is Hamza Youssef and Angus Robertson.
Angus
from my
Robertson
research.
would very much like to run. He did an interview on the Times, I think, just before the Nicola Sturgeon resigned, and his tone was very interesting. He seemed very excited in a way to see the resignation of someone that he's not I believe not in the same faction of the SNP as.
I think he is a Sturgeon knight, Angus Robertson.
Well, I think he appears to be. He defends her in public, but he's perhaps not the most popular universally in the SNP, and perhaps for that reason he would not succeed. And and I would need you to give me more information on the third candidate.
Hamza Youssef, young. He's a younger member of the SNP, more new. He's a Muslim. He is the health. He was previously justice. I think he represented the SNP in one of the debates in 2019, if I remember correctly. He's I think the least popular of the three. But interestingly, one of the things you said about Angus Robertson is there's again rumour, nothing confirmed, that there are some skeletons in a closet somewhere with Angus Robertson that might be revealed if he runs. I've seen that. I don't know obviously if there's any truth to that because I don't know what those skeletons might be. But that's been mentioned.
But I was wondering whether they'd pick Kate Forbes also. Because of the other candidate you just mentioned about a point about diversity, and in Scotland they seem to have done, like Ruth Davidson did very well with the Scottish Tories. Part of Nicola Sturgeon, the fact that she was a woman, I think perhaps Scottish politics was very female for a while, which was very interesting. And if you look also in terms of whether that helps nationalist parties, I don't know if there's a link if you look at Sinn Féin, who have leaders. Their leader in the north, Michelle O'Neill, and their leader in the south, Mary Lou McDonald, are both women, and having young women in power, I believe conveys modernity, and that maybe if you're talking about the SNP, talk about the future of Scotland, of independent Scotland, if they choose these younger candidates. And to me, Angus Robertson, he's been around for so long, and he's very much emblematic of a different type of Scotland that perhaps you could view as being in the past, whereas women like Kate Forbes could symbolise the future.
Yeah, she's 32, and when she became Economic Secretary unexpectedly after the resignation of her predecessor for rather dodgy things, and she had to give the budget, I think, with 4 hours' notice. Daniel, what do you think? Who do you think is the SNP's best bet, and who do you think is going to get it, and what do you think to the candidates, and any other candidates that I haven't mentioned? Potential candidates, I should say.
What I've seen, I haven't been greatly impressed by what I've seen of Hamza Youssef, not in terms of what he said politically, but just in terms of his skill in Holyrood. Angus Robertson, when he was in Westminster as the main representatives of the SNP, he could roar array at the Tories. He was quite impressive at that, and in some ways seems like the obvious candidate to go for. Katie Forbes, though, I think would be best for Scotland, and although that wouldn't be good for the Conservative Party, that would be better for the country. And she, as someone who never voted for the Scottish Gender Recognition Act, would be able to move the party away from that, much as Keir Starmer's trying to move the party away from anti-Semitism, as we will talk about later, I'm sure, when we talk more about Jeremy Corbyn. But she is astonishingly young. I mean, 32 is almost ridiculous. But I think she'd be the best person, but probably Angus Robertson would win. But I wouldn't be surprised if I'm wrong about that.
Interesting. I think it's also the case with Kate Forbes that we mentioned about her being on the right of the party. I mean, even ignoring the social conservatism, I do believe economically as well, she's on the right of the party as well. I think Anna Sarwar, who's also on the right of the Scottish Labour Party, would still be more left-wing than her, I think. Ben, what do you think? And disagree with me if you do. But what your wider thoughts on who do you think is going to win? Who do you think is best to lead the SNP?
Well, I'll confess, I'm not entirely read up on the way they elect their candidates to be.
It's a STV, single transferable vote.
Because how you elect your leaders matters tremendously. Liz Truss would never have been the Conservative Prime Minister had they have just voted for their favourite candidate. So their election system and how that transfers is incredibly important. If it's STV, I imagine it'll be someone of the left and not Katie Forbes. I think there's a lot of hot air blown up around Katie Forbes, if I'm honest. I read an article in the Telegraph that was drippingly submissive about her, which I put down a lot to. There's a lot of right-wing people in the UK.
You seem to think the Telegraph has a big influence.
Oh, the Telegraph is incredibly valuable.
And Ben's an avid reader, surprisingly.
I made £140 through the Telegraph because I thought Liz Truss would be the next Prime Minister, but that's unrelated. But there's a lot of positive coverage of Katie Forbes in the right-wing UK media because it helps their anti-trans agenda, which they can use to try and cobble together a campaign for the next election. But I don't not convinced that actually translates into real support in the SNP, but I could be wrong. So I'm not entirely sure. I would expect it would be a Sturgeonite and not someone of the right of the party, but I wouldn't take that and put my hand on the Bible on it.
Okay, now one of the things we've mentioned here is Kate Forbes' social conservatism. She's a member of an evangelical church. That's already caused quite a stir online. Doesn't mean that's going to reflect into the public. Of course, she is narrowly the most popular of them. But there are some that have said, look, someone with the views that she has can't lead a progressive party. Is that something that that you as the panel agree with? And if so, then what do evangelical Christians, or indeed, of course, perhaps other people with other religious beliefs from other ones. We don't know Hamza Youssef's views on some things, for example, that he might, with his, or people with other faiths that might contradict some of the main progressive aims of parties like the SNP. If you believe that people of the convictions of people like Kate Forbes can't lead a progressive party, then where do they go politically speaking if they are progressive on many other things? It's just obviously that their beliefs that go with their religion means that it's that's the sort of the only thing that sort of counters their presence in the party. Daniel, what do you think to this?
I think it's a fascinating question and something that's really got to be looked into. I mean, look, every Prime Minister that's walked into the doors of 10 Downing Street until Rishi Sunak, until literally last year, claimed to profess to the Christian faith, and
Protestant
politically
faith.
in that sense has had an extraordinary influence in that extent. Tony Blair did of course convert to Catholicism.
Right, but it was a
after he
Protestant
left
whilst he was
office.
Prime Minister.
He was what? Sorry.
A Protestant whilst Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson,
He
I
was,
think,
yes.
was a Catholic.
That's actually interesting because it's unclear about Boris's religion because he was baptised Catholic and then practiced
Confirmed
as a
Anglican.
Protestant. I don't think Boris is really.
I think that's quite symbolic.
Yeah,
I think Daniel would also agree that perhaps Boris doesn't exactly
Not the most religious man
express
to
the
enter
Well, I'm
Actually,
saying, I'm saying they profess to have a faith.
Yes,
I'm not exactly.
there have been
claiming
some, not
they-
all prime ministers. There's been some atheists, but yeah, Clement Attlee, Jim Callaghan,
I
but
think Jim
No, they
Cameron didn't believe in
no,
God either.
they all claim to believe in God, as from what I've seen, and that's only started to shift recently. I'm not saying they necessarily actually believed it, because of course politicians have a tendency to lie, but it will be a fascinating thing if it is her Christian faith that brings her down. That will be a great shame, and you're going to have to compare it to, if the SNP. Or British politics in general, is very pleased with the fact that you've got Muslims doing very well, who might very well hold similar, what is now considered unsavoury beliefs, but because they're Muslim, we'll look past it. But because she's Christian, we won't look past it, because that happens to be the majority religion and the religion that has been dominant in Britain's heritage and past. And I think that's an incredible shame, and I'd be terribly sad about that.
we've seen recently another evangelical Christian in the Progressive Party, Tim Farron, was brought down based on some of his links to religion. Ben, what do you think about someone who holds strong religious convictions that might not align with progressive parties? Do you think that's possible?
Well, you shouldn't not vote for someone because of their religion, but if the views they hold and they claim that's part of their religion, that's a legitimate reason not to vote for someone. If you can't vote for someone because you don't like their views, and that's seen as wrong, that's absurd. On Daniel's point about Christians being voted over for being penalised for things that other religions would not be, I think that's a difficult question. I mean, as a Catholic, there is an outsized focus on abortion in Catholicism as opposed to other religions. So most people, when asked what do you identify with the pro-life cause, would say Catholicism before most other things, because the Catholic Church focuses on it quite heavily in comparison to other religions. So that might figure into it. But yes, of course, you shouldn't vote for someone or not vote for someone just because of their religion. That's base bigotry.
Scarlett, what do you think?
I don't have a particularly strong opinion about
That's
this.
absolutely fine.
Which is because with Christianity in Scotland, do you believe that is a fundamental, do you believe that in an election that would be a fundamental question?
I don't.
Could I comment on this?
Yeah, go on.
Let's not forget it was the Scottish churches that actually defeated the Scottish government, which was the SNP.
Yes,
over
but the Scottish
fact
people
that
themselves
they
have this
closed it down.
perception that they are more perhaps modern than the people in the rest of England, where they talk about
But
their social beliefs. So I don't know whether that would even factor in.
I would say the evangelical church in parts of Scotland is actually stronger than the evangelical church in England.
Well, there's that, but
two
that
things
there's
can
that
be true at once.
history in
Yes.
there is that history in Scotland of perhaps more conviction in the religions. You could argue that Presbyterianism, since it's a more extreme form of Christianity than Anglicanism, perhaps there is that sort of more potential for religious zeal in Scotland. But I don't know in the modern day how much that would have an impact.
Yeah, that's the thing. I suppose we'll have to see when if Kate Forbes does run for the election, whether she again whether or not that seeps through to the public and whether or not
Because if
it's
the
something they care
SNP are
about.
all about independence, how does the church factor into this?
Yeah, it might not matter. I suppose that's something we will see, but it's interesting to hear your views. Okay, we're going to take a break. Sturgeon's gone, so bye bye.
This is University
Radio Nottingham.
Hello and welcome back to The Big Picture. I am Felix Hawes and we are live on University Radio Nottingham. And during the break we were talking about Ian Blackford's sheep. And Scarlett, tell me, what are the names of his sheep? What are they called?
They're called Mango and Chutney.
Mango and
I
Chutney.
believe they may have departed from this world.
Oh, well, I'm very sorry. Rest in peace to Ian Blackford's sheep. Okay, our next topic is Biden's balloons. Well, there's been quite a lot of goings on above the USA. The White House also didn't rule out originally that an alien invasion had begun. But now it has been confirmed that it isn't aliens, or at least that's what they're telling us. So it's likely China. That's the assumption. 7, I think, balloons or balloon-like items have been shot down across USA and Canada recently. Ben, you mentioned to me during the break about the USA's huge military spending, more than the rest of the world combined. You did that research. I don't want to take credit for it. What do you think then to the fact that they didn't spot these balloons or alien spaceships?
I think clearly there's a lot of taxpayers' money in America going straight into the pockets of defence contractors, and someone has to look into it, because the fact they didn't spot these gigantic balloons, which are I believe they're several miles long,
That is big. That is a big balloon.
are not being spotted by what is meant to be the most advanced military in the world. It's obscene. My thoughts on the problem more generally are, this is obviously an attempt by China to assert its strength, which America should be aware to, and Biden is aware to. Last week he gave permission for more US military bases to be set up in the Philippines, just 200 miles from Taiwan. The idea that they should have been shot down immediately, which some Republicans said, is, I think, ludicrous, because they would have fallen on civilian areas and killed people.
Of course, under Trump, they didn't shoot them down at all.
Of course. So I dismiss that entirely, and it's more a political movement than an actual spying movement, because, the idea of China spying on the US is nothing new or outrageous. If you think the CIA isn't doing the same thing in China, you need to read up on your history. Those are my thoughts in brief.
Scarlett, what do you make to China, balloons, Biden, and aliens?
I think it's very interesting the way that the US responded, and I like that the press secretary had to confirm, yes, there are no aliens. But in terms of the political implications, the idea that they've cancelled the trip of the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, I find very interesting, because that will have impact in terms of US-China relations, which is becoming ever more apparent on the global scene.
Daniel, what do you think? And what do you think about the UK as well? I'm sorry, just to give you an extra point here. Liz Truss from The Abyss has come back and said the government needs to be stronger on China. What do you think to the overall China situation and the balloons in America?
Yeah, I think I want to firstly comment on what Ben said. If you're wondering why the US military budget is so high, it's because they actually spend a lot of it, I've been reliably informed, simply buying people houses who are in the US military, and thus propping up the US property market. That is actually a huge part of their spending. I broadly agree with Liz Truss on this foreign policy issue. The United Kingdom should have a strong stance against China. It's not to say that it shouldn't be open to a reformed China, but let's not forget the Uyghur situation in China and the treatment of their civilians and their authoritarian state. No, it's not something. It's not a country that we should be easy on. But you asked about the UK. Maybe we should talk about somewhere closer to home, like I don't know, the University of Nottingham, and the fact that we have huge connections to China. So it's not just something that's affecting world governments, but it's affecting much smaller institutions like where we are speaking from right now.
Interesting point. Do we have any wider thoughts on this issue about UK-China relations or anything from...
Specifically on the university point, I have a friend of mine who said that in one of his seminars there are students from China that just sit at the back and just take a transcript of what the lecturer is saying, don't speak to anyone and then leave. And I don't sort of know what that means. I don't know why there's not some more discussion or regulation or anything, because as Daniel was saying, part of how China, as we look at what they've done in Africa, in terms of essentially paying for the building of infrastructure for entire states, has been very subtle and itself a form of espionage as what we're looking at. And I think it's very interesting for the future to see how much impact China have already had on themselves, in the rest of the world, as they've slowly built themselves up over the past few decades.
Well, there is a friendship bridge outside Nottingham. So there we are. All right. I know this has been a very brief section, but we've got a meaty topic to end on. So here's another music break. And as we're talking about Biden and balloons, it's a party in the USA.
This is University
Radio Nottingham.
Hello and welcome back. We are live on University Radio Nottingham. This is The Big Picture with Felix Hawes. Well, on Wednesday, when Nicola Sturgeon resigned, we also had some news from Keir Starmer. He said that his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, was not going to stand as a Labour MP for Islington North, and Corbyn said, excuse me, no, I am going to, and has said that he's going to try and get his local membership to support him, which would mean, if that is the case, the NEC would have to directly intervene to prevent Corbyn from being the Labour candidate. So it's not quite over yet. It's not necessarily the case to say that Corbyn's constituency Labour Party do overwhelmingly support him. They only narrowly voted in favour of him in the vote of no confidence in 2016, and they backed Keir Starmer in the leadership election in 2020, not Rebecca Long-Bailey, despite Corbyn's wishes. So it's not necessarily the case that they even want him anyway. That being said, he does have, according to The Guardian, and I have no idea how they've managed to get this information, but he has 7 times the amount of popular support for incumbency factor than your average MP. As your average MP would probably lose their deposit if they ran, that probably would translate to about 14% of the vote. I don't know. We'll talk about that and whether or not Corbyn could win as an independent. Anyway, there are also talks from his supporters that he could stand, or urging him to stand against Sadiq Khan as Mayor of London as well. So that's another thing to potentially talk about. Diane Abbott, who is a Corbynite and Keir Starmer critic, said on the Newsagent's podcast recently that Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn perfectly got along during Corbyn's tenure as leader, but the thing that they disagreed on was Brexit, because in his heart of hearts, Corbyn was a Brexiteer, while Starmer, of course, was the one that pushed for a second referendum. And that also leads on to a question, and this is a long introduction, of whether or not, if Starmer says that Corbyn's views on anti-Semitism in particular were unacceptable now, why did he serve in his cabinet at the time when many Labour MPs resigned from the cabinet, or indeed resigned from the party overall? Daniel, we're going to start with you. The least likely here to back Corbyn. What do you think to this move? Is this... Corbyn was a very unpopular leader. Net 72, minus 72 in support. Really low. Keir Starmer's obviously a lot more popular. Is this getting rid of the left?
The public?
Sorry?
Amongst who? The public?
Yeah, the public, yes. Not amongst in the Labour Party as much, yeah.
Well, I think it obviously depended at which point that happened. But no, the reason that Keir Starmer said this is because Corbyn is still not accepted the anti-Semitism report that was written, was it a year ago, a couple years ago?
2 years ago, by the Human Rights Qualities Commission. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And which have just.
I am talking to the expert on this topic.
Yes. And they've taken Labour out of special measures now. The first party to be taken into them for racism.
Yes. Look. I think it will be political fire, or ammunition for the Tories in the next election to say, why did Keir Starmer serve with Jeremy Corbyn? I don't think it's going to win a general election. Ultimately, Corbyn was always going to have moderates in his cabinet, and Keir Starmer, the public will understand he was there because Corbyn needed his successor when he was going to fail, when the hard left was going to fail. And also I think Keir Starmer was basically shoring up his position. You never want to have an infighting party going into a general election. That never ends well. And this has basically meant that it can't happen. Now, there's questions over it. I saw Diane Abbott saying, it should really be entirely up to Islington North CLP to get to decide on who their next candidate is. If Corbyn's done, and he won't be standing there, that is just a fawn out of Keir Starmer's side, and the Tories will have to fight on something else. Because, still today, I see them talk about Keir Starmer being a friend of Corbyn, and I'm pretty convinced he's not.
That's interesting that you do think that he is not a fan of Corbyn. Obviously, his recent actions suggest that. Also, before I go to Ben and Scarlett on this, this does put a lot of the Labour left in a difficult position. If Corbyn stands against Labour and they decide they want to support Corbyn, then they're breaking party rules of supporting a candidate that isn't their own party, and they'd have to leave the party as well. And that also is the case for Momentum, which Keir Starmer's already sort of alluded to the fact that he is willing to see them go from their ties to Labour. Ben, what do you think to this?
I think it's very important to get the timeline right. The issue with Jeremy Corbyn, the reason why he had the whip removed and Keir Starmer will now block him, is because he wouldn't accept the report which came out in 2020 once Keir Starmer was leader. So it's not a case of Keir Starmer denying or defending Jeremy Corbyn against these examples of anti-Semitism whilst they were in opposition.
Well, Louise Ellman, when she resigned, a Jewish MP, she resigned from the Labour Party, so actually left the party, not just the shadow cabinet, but the party, over anti-Semitism. Andrew Marr said to Keir Starmer on his show, when he was the Sunday morning show for the BBC, what do you make to that? And he said he did not accept Louise Ellman's views on anti-Semitism. Back to you, Ben. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so the reason Jeremy Corbyn was kicked out of the Labour Party was because he wouldn't accept the report on anti-Semitism which had been commissioned, the reason he had the Labour whip removed was for that reason, which was the right thing to do. Blocking him from standing, I probably think is the right thing to do, but it does run the risk of a Ken Livingstone situation where they massively underestimate the power base behind Jeremy Corbyn, and he can run as an independent, and then if he wins as an independent, it's just a massive embarrassment for the Labour Party anyway. What I don't like is the words Keir Starmer said about momentum, because the truth is the Labour Party has been in this civil war between left and right, arguably since 1951, but certainly since the battles in the late 70s, early 80s, and it's this continuous battle of the right getting in, slowly shutting the left out of power, then some election defeat, the left getting an opportunity to get back in, shutting the right out of power. We've been having this battle for 50 bloody years. The way you win an election is with representation on all wings of the party. That's the only sustainable way to maintain a party. And this, the contempt, frankly, that Keir Starmer is treating the left of the party with, indeed going back on all of his manifesto pledges, was a stupid thing to do, because it was clear at the time he wasn't an extremist. Or, sorry, that's wrong of saying it, on the left of the party. So, in terms of blocking Jeremy Corbyn being a Labour candidate, I think that's probably the right thing to do, because you can't have any tolerance for anti-Semitism in the party. But on the question of his comments about momentum, I think it's entirely self-defeating and brings into media spotlight his own dishonesty.
That's an interesting point. Of course, Owen Jones, journalist, regularly brings up the fact that Keir Starmer is one of the most dishonest man in politics.
Well, he's right.
Is he just not a politician?
Well, yeah, I mean,
No.
Owen Jones seems to be more obsessed with Keir Starmer than he is about Conservatives at the moment.
To be fair, you could argue Keir Starmer is more dishonest than Liz Truss. I mean, Liz Truss ran on cutting taxes and her agenda, and then got in and did it, and then had to U-turn because it was a disaster, but she ran on doing it. Keir Starmer ran on basically a Corbynite platform, and then has systematically discarded everything, and is trying to change the leadership rules to stop someone from the left getting in again. So he is extremely dishonest what he's done. And it's not normal to do that, by the way. It's not normal for a politician to get in from the party with a mandate for their wing of the party and then to totally discard it. The only other person who's really done it is Neil Kinnock.
And what's also to say is that if Keir Starmer was willing to say, I'm a Corbynite in the leadership election, then go when he has to face the general public and say, no, I'm a moderate, and then what if he gets in and then starts being Corbynite again? I mean, don't really know where Keir Starmer stands, one could argue. Scarlett, what do you think to Corbyn? You were telling me before the show starts you think he would actually have quite a good chance of beating Labour in Islington North. What do you think to all of this?
I believe that exactly it is. If he ran as an independent, he would most likely get in, is sort of the mood on the ground in his general constituency, which would obviously create a massive problem for Keir Starmer because he's sort of banking on the idea that if Jeremy Corbyn does not have that backing by the Labour Party, then he will not get elected. I think it's interesting the concept that he could go against Sadiq Khan as an independent in the Mayor of London race, and I believe he would also have a shot there. But to an extent, outside of the people sitting in this room, how much impact does Jeremy Corbyn still carry within the headlines for the ordinary person on the ground? I think it's quite an important point because when you ask ordinary people, they do not know that Keir Starmer ran on this Corbynite basis, and when you perhaps suggest that to people, they will come at you with the general assumption of, all politicians are liars, or he did what he had to do. So I don't know how much this will affect his actual Keir Starmer's electoral success. I think the point on Keir Starmer and Brexit's quite interesting, the fact that he's reversed his position on that and the idea that he backed a second referendum and now doesn't. I don't know whether the public will still care about Brexit. I believe that the amount of apathy that the public have at the moment may mean that Starmer is all right as long as he focuses on positive change instead of looking back. I think that's his hope, that people don't look back and look at, the way he got in to be the Labour leader was through dishonest means, and under the assumption that no one wants to talk about Brexit anymore, perhaps apart from Alistair Campbell, who won't go a tweet a day without mentioning it. So I think that Keir Starmer made the right decision, and I don't believe it would backfire on him, because even as an independent, I don't know how much sway Jeremy Corbyn would still carry within Parliament and within the headlines.
He'd remain in opposition, which, of course, he's very much used to.
Yes.
Interesting what you mentioned there about the public perception. I think a lot of focus groups were saying they were a bit confused about Corbyn's status in the Labour Party. Is he in or is he out? I suppose this does make that clearer. Whether or not that matters to people is a different question entirely. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to end it there. Thank you to Ben, to Scarlett and Daniel for a very interesting discussion. 3 very interesting topics. We'll be back next week on The Big Picture. I have been, as always, Felix Hawes. And as with Sturgeon leaving and Corbyn gone, it does seem that that Labour have a good chance of winning the next election. 95%, according to the electoral calculus, chance of winning the next election. So let's remind ourselves of 1997, when that was the last possibility. Can things only get better? You can